Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, February 3rd. And tonight, we begin with a warning for tens of millions of Canadians and Americans that are at risk of frostbite and hypothermia over the next couple of days. Now, that's because of an extreme cold snap gripping much of the eastern part of both countries. Temperatures are dipping as low as -40 with the wind chill in many areas. Environment Canada has issued extreme cold weather alerts for Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and all Atlantic provinces. That Arctic cold front is sweeping across parts of the U.S. as well, with frigid wind chills expected to stretch into the weekend. Meanwhile, officials are keeping their eyes on a suspected high-altitude surveillance balloon that has been seen flying in U.S. airspace this week. China's ambassador to Canada has been called on the carpet to explain the suspected spy balloon. Global Affairs Canada says Ambassador Chung Pei-Wu was summoned yesterday after the balloon was spotted. Officials have not said whether the balloon flew over Canadian airspace, but the Department of National Defense says its movements are being tracked by the North American Aerospace Defense Command. China's foreign ministry has confirmed the balloon is Chinese, but says it is a civilian airship used primarily for weather research. Well, after facing pushback from many in rural Canada, the federal government is withdrawing a controversial amendment to its guns bill. The amendment would have added many popular hunting rifles and shotguns to a list of prohibited firearms in Canada. The move led to an outcry, with additional pressure on Ottawa from many Liberal MPs to change or withdraw the new definition of weapons being banned. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is claiming victory. He says it was his party that forced Mr. Trudeau into, quote, this humiliating climb down. Well, the Liberals' Online Streaming Act also saw senators making a dozen amendments before passing it on Thursday. Bill C-11 would update Canada's broadcasting rules to reflect online streaming giants such as YouTube, Netflix, and Spotify, and require them to contribute to Canadian content. Senators made amendments intended to protect user-generated content and highlight the promotion of Indigenous languages and Black content creators. Canadian Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez says the Liberal government will not accept all of the Senate's recommendations, but he didn't say which ones he disagrees with. All right, turning our attention to a meeting in Toronto where Canada's finance ministers met with Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland today. The in-person meeting focused on the economic situation both domestically and globally. The ministers discussed how to provide incentives and supports to be competitive with the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. The federal finance minister also discussed the ongoing challenges with health care in Canada with her provincial counterparts. A Quebec-based COVID-19 vaccine maker plans to close its operations in the province. Mitsubishi Chemical confirmed yesterday that it would stop marketing the Medicago-produced Covifenz vaccine. The plant-based vaccine was approved a year ago by Health Canada for use in adults aged 18 to 64. Quebec Economy Minister Pierre Fitzgibbon says the province is working with both the federal government and Mitsubishi to find a buyer for Medicago, which he says develops important technology for the life sciences sector. All right, switching gears to a look at home sales in Toronto, which were down 44.6% year over year in January. The Toronto Regional Real Estate Board says the results fall in line with expectations. This comes as the number of sales and average selling prices were similar to December 2022. The average selling price was also down 16.4% at $1.04 million. The impact of higher borrowing costs has continued to reverberate across the housing market. New listings were also down 3.7% year over year. Well, as the grocery sector continues to feel the impact of global events, one grocery product appears to be sidestepping widespread shortages and wildly spiking prices affecting other countries. The system that controls the supply, import, and farm price of eggs, poultry, and dairy is often criticized as benefiting Canadian farmers at the expense of consumers. But University of Waterloo history professor Bruce Muirhead says supply management is keeping family farms alive and eggs on store shelves, which comes at a time when we're seeing shortages around the world. On the West Coast, an international marine protection conference will open in Vancouver tomorrow. The Impact 5 conference is the first meeting of its kind since world leaders agreed in Montreal to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. Fisheries and Oceans Minister Joyce Murray and Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault will be among thousands of delegates from 123 countries. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at the energy markets with Dan McTeague. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Up now, it's Forum Daily's Energy Update with Dan McTeague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Take it away, Dan.
Well, thank you for that, Nima. And again, another very interesting week as many parts of the country, especially in the east, are reading from extraordinarily cold temperatures. In some cases, I think by the day's end, we'll probably be able to assess that these are the coldest days we've seen since 2016. We still have markets, trending down. And that energy markets, one would think we have extreme cold like this, natural gas prices would go up, propane prices in the futures markets would go up, diesel prices would go up, jet fuel, etc. But the world is truly upside down. Coinciding with this extraordinary cold weather that we're seeing in a place that happens to consume the most energy in the world. Yes, that's the New York region. So it's Boston, Washington, you can throw Toronto and Montreal in there. This area consumes more as a region than any place in the world, yes, including China. You have nervousness in the markets in which energy players are not actually looking at energy fundamentals at all. They're not looking at this significant drawdown in terms of energy stockpiles. They're instead looking at good economic news coming from the United States. The non-farm payrolls this morning rose or at least dropped to levels not seen in over 40, 50 years. And that would otherwise be considered good, bullish news that would drive up energy prices. But of course, you have a market that is completely dysfunctional and players within it who frankly shouldn't be there. But that's just my opinion. Now saying, oh, well, this will cause the US Fed to raise interest rates, therefore demand destruction at some point down the road. Look, this is just kicking the can down even further. Oil's got to come back to $100 a barrel. Gasoline prices have to go up. Diesel prices have to go up to respond to demand. And as long as we continue to ignore those fundamentals, we're going to wind up with much higher, more disruptive, and more painful costs come April, May, and June, when, of course, demand does truly rise. I'll leave that aside for now, Nima, because I think it's important that people understand that maybe OPEC truly got it right a couple of months ago when they said that energy markets in North America are dysfunctional. They truly are, and I can't give a better illustration than what we're seeing this morning. Oil up $2 a barrel, then dropping by day's end. What we're seeing across Canada, though, is a reflection of perhaps more downward pressure on prices. Let's start with Ontario. We were $1.56 last week, now down to $1.44. That's likely to drop another 3 or 4 cents a liter back to $1.40. Quebec will see a similar decrease, probably bringing them back in Montreal down into the vicinity of roughly $1.55. For Western Canada, the Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, look for prices to drop an average of 4 to 5 cents a liter as well. So you'll be able to get gasoline in some stations well below $1.20, for instance, Calgary, where there is, as with the rest of the province, no provincial tax. British Columbia, slowly but surely, we are going to see in the interior prices drop about 5 cents a liter net. So perhaps down to the lower 150 range for places like Kelowna and Kamloops and Prince George. For Vancouver, we're going to see prices trend down to the low $70s. Ditto for Victoria. Now, on the East Coast, where we've seen some shocking numbers thanks to the regulated prices there, where bureaucrats are invited to invent numbers, especially in Newfoundland, where diesel continues to be almost $2.50 a liter, when even without tax, it's only $1.70 in Ontario. The difference is only about 10 cents a liter. Sooner or later, they're going to have to clue in, smarten up, and smell the coffee and get those prices back down. But until those in Atlantic Canada can get away from the security rug of a regulated system that doesn't serve them well, they're going to continue to pay through the nose at the hose. And that means, of course, in places like Halifax, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, look for prices to drop off about maybe 3 to 4 cents a liter, with diesel hopefully coming down as much as 20 cents a liter if it were to respond to market forces. The bottom line, predictions happen everywhere. They happen every single day. We're doing it here. Many others are copying this, of course. But it's important for people to understand the days of the need for regulated prices have long since gone. The internet, transparency in terms of numbers, the availability of those numbers at anyone's fingertips within seconds on the New York, Chicago, or Pacific Northwest markets makes the ability to predict accurately the day and the day after prices much easier. You really don't need bureaucrats reinventing the wheel and trying to guess what the market is doing. So, Nima, best to say for this week, it's going to be a great week for consumers. Sooner or later, markets will smarten up. And when they do, watch out. I think that's going to start in March. We'll take back to you, Nima. We'll talk next week.
All right, thanks for that, Dan. Again, that was Dan McTeague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. All right, stay with us. Coming up after the break, we'll have Bobby Del Rio, host of the Daily Drop, for our weekly crypto update. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Now it's time for our crypto and digital asset update with Bobby Del Rio, host of the Daily Drop, to give us our weekly glimpse into the world of cryptocurrency.
So the biggest news in crypto this week was actually the biggest news for the international economy, which was the Fed funds rate in the United States. And obviously this is significant as the US dollar is involved in 88% of transactions in the entire world. So all eyes obviously were paying attention this week, and they decided to raise their rate by 25 basis points. So obviously, as the economy continues to contract, it's sort of a bad thing. But considering that we went 75 basis points, 75 basis points, 75 basis points, 50 basis points, we are starting to see a slow in the increase of interest rates, which has largely been interpreted as positive for the economy and for markets generally, and for cryptocurrency being a risk-on asset. So for anyone who doesn't know what that means, essentially, it's sort of like the risky part of the economy. So when things are doing better, people are more confident. They start putting more money into crypto, and that's definitely what we've seen. So that rate hike was largely construed positively, and so we've seen. Bitcoin, I believe, is up 40% in 2023 alone. And right after that, that Fed rate announcement, every single cryptocurrency shot straight up. So, you were seeing in 24 hours, cryptocurrencies increasing anywhere from 5 to 35% in some cases. And that's in one day, right? So obviously that shows you how positive people are right now about crypto. Now, with that said, again, and I'll get into that a bit more, cryptocurrency is notoriously volatile, so you never know exactly how sustainable these trends are. So you always have to proceed with caution. But certainly, anybody who's tracking crypto in 2023, you're seeing a lot of green almost every single day. Speaking of green, it looks like Bitcoin is trying to get a little more into the green by adding utility. So Bitcoin NFTs is starting to get a lot of attention. Bitcoin, Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that SEC Chair Gary Gensler has unambiguously called a commodity, right? Which is good because it means the likelihood for them to get sort of punitive legal action against them is very low. But with that said, Bitcoin is also, in a way, it's just like a blob of money that kind of sits there and doesn't do much. So when you look at the projections of the other cryptocurrencies, they're really doing a lot of different things in the DeFi space and NFTs and all of these different forms of utility that Bitcoin really hasn't had until now. So Bitcoin NFTs are now being launched. There are some issues with gas fees and, like how decentralized can it be when you're adding NFTs, and will it slow down the network and everything? But largely speaking, Adding some utility to Bitcoin is very intriguing, and a lot of NFTs are being minted on Bitcoin as we speak. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. And speaking of paying attention, certainly the Federal Reserve has been paying attention to the unemployment rate in the United States. It's actually today where they actually announced the unemployment rate in the US decreased to a 53-year low of 3.4% from 3.5%, which is good, but also will bleed into my last point about uncertainty. It's very difficult to understand what this sort of mixed economic signals mean. The bulls are going to interpret it as, hey, there's lots of jobs and inflation is decreasing. Let's party, and the bears are like, I think the second half of 2023 is going to suck and everything's going to fall off a cliff because the data doesn't line up. Nobody really knows what's going on. I have to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what's going on. So I'm going to say, again, proceed with caution.
And that was Bobby Del Rio, host of The Daily Drop, which airs Fridays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, only on the News Forum Network. All right, stay with us. We've got more news from around the world coming up after the break, so stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. Well, following the discovery of a Chinese air balloon flying over sensitive American sites this week, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has postponed his diplomatic trip to Beijing. The trip's cancellation comes as the Biden administration weighs a broader response to the balloon's presence, which China says was for weather research and had blown off course. The U.S. had described it as a surveillance satellite. Now, this marks a new blow to already strained U.S.-Chinese relations. Staying in the U.S., which saw a surprisingly strong number of jobs added to the economy last month. Now, this is despite aggressive rate hikes by the Federal Reserve to combat inflation. The U.S. government reports the country added 517,000 jobs in January. This sends U.S. unemployment to 3.4%, which is a new half-century low. January's job growth far exceeded December's gain of 269,000 jobs. The Fed has raised its key interest rate 8 times since last March, this in an effort to contain inflation, which hit a 4-decade high last year before slowing. Well, as tensions continue to rise in Ukraine, NATO is calling on Russia to respect the only treaty it has with the United States to keep a lid on nuclear weapons expansion. In a statement on Friday, the 30-nation security organization is urging Moscow to allow on-the-ground inspections of military sites to resume. The New START treaty was signed by Russia and the U.S. in 2010. Russia suspended cooperation under the pact last August over U.S. support for Ukraine. All right, turning to tensions in Turkey, which has railed against a group of Western countries that temporarily shut their consulates in Istanbul for a second day. On Friday, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu accused 9 countries of failing to share information on a security threat that led to the closures. He also accused them of aiming to cause Turkey harm. This week, 9 Western nations either closed down their consulates in Istanbul or issued travel warnings to citizens visiting Turkey, citing security threats. The International Olympic Committee continues to face criticism for Russian and Belarusian participation at the upcoming 2024 Paris Games. The prime ministers of the 3 Baltic countries warn of a boycott of the Games if Russian athletes are allowed to compete. Leaders from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have urged the committee to ban Russian competitors because of the war in Ukraine. The 3 countries border Russia and gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. Turning our attention to Indonesia now, where Southeast Asian foreign ministers are meeting for talks. They are overshadowed by the deteriorating situation in military-ruled Myanmar. Myanmar belongs to the 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, but its foreign minister was not invited to attend the meetings. His absence is a result of Myanmar's lack of cooperation in implementing a 5-step agreement with ASEAN to try to resolve the crisis, which was set off by the military seizure of power 2 years ago. The World Health Organization says one of its employees has been released in northern Mali after being abducted by unidentified assailants. Dr. Mahamadou Diawara was freed Thursday afternoon and is in Gaotown. A WHO spokesperson said preparations are being made to send him to the capital. The West African nation has been battling a decade-long jihadi insurgency linked to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. All right, switching gears to a new partnership deal between Ford and Red Bull as the car maker returns to Formula One. Now, that partnership starts with the immediate technical support this season and engines in 2026. Ford is the first American engine supplier to return to the F1. This comes as the series is set to race 5 times this year in North America, with 3 of those races in the U.S. Meanwhile, the NHL All-Star festivities kick off tonight in Sunrise, Florida, with the skills competitions. The 4 returning events are fastest skater, hardest shot, the breakaway challenge, and accuracy shooting. The 3 new ones will be the trendy tandem splash shot and pitch and puck. Professional hockey player Soroya Tinker was often the only Black player on the ice growing up in the Toronto area city of Oshawa, Ontario. But now the 24-year-old is a defender for the Toronto Six of the Premier Hockey Federation. In November, Miss Tinker founded the Canadian chapter of Black Girl Hockey Club. It's a nonprofit that provides scholarships, financial aid, community programs, and mentorship opportunities to young Black girls across the country. The Yale alumnus says young Black girls deserve to be confident in who they are and know that they have a place in the game. What an inspiration. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles. We're available on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, Canada. Have a great weekend.